The song Recruiting Sergeant by Great Big Sea holds a special place in my heart, reminding me of a lot of lovely people in my life. And the song speaks of true events of the First World War, experienced by a regiment of Newfoundland soldiers, the context of which we'll explore together in this video. 2 recruiting sergeants came to the CLB. The CLB stands for the Church Lads Brigade, but since 1978, it is known officially as the Church Lads and Church Girls Brigade. And the CLB, at its most basic understanding, is a boot camp for youth mixed with Boy Scouts, meant to teach military-like discipline. The CLB was formed as in England, there was already a group called the Boys Brigade, and a man named Walter Guy wanted there to be an Anglican section of the group, but his proposal was rejected. So, Walter created the Church Lads Brigade to be able to have his Anglican club, and this group would make its way across the Atlantic Sea a year later, due to the efforts of Harold Blackler. And since the brigade accepts individuals from 7 to 19, the fact that once the First World War broke out, recruiting sergeants came to the CLB looking for recruits is not odd. And many CLB members from all over the British Empire did sign up to fight in the First World War. Also, the CLB Armory was used as the recruiting office for the town of St. John's, the capital of Newfoundland, for the sons of the merchants to join the Blue Putteess. All the hands enlisted, 500 young men. Enlist you Newfoundlanders, and come follow me. A large portion of Newfoundlanders at the time were merchants, who supplied the island and its fisheries with supplies that were not available on the island. Also at the time, Newfoundland was an independent dominion from Canada, and it was assumed that due to the small population of the land, that not enough Newfoundlanders would enlist to have their own regiment, and thus have to be part of Canadian or British regiments. So it was almost a shock when over 700 men enlisted to fight in the First World War, although only 537 would meet the requirements and be accepted into the army. The accepted men would be called the First 500 by locals. These men were also called the Blue Putteess, since the government was unprepared to fit this many men in uniform, nor had the capabilities in Newfoundland to fabricate the signature British khaki-colored uniforms. So, these men had to make do. A part of their makeshift uniforms was a very noticeable blue color to their puttees, which were originally used as uniforms by members of the CLB. They crossed the broad Atlantic in the brave Florizel. The SS Florizel was named after Prince Florizel, from a Shakespearean play, and before World War I, the ship was used to navigate the icy waters of the north for seal hunting. This ship was repurposed as a transport vessel during the First World War, and transported the Blue Putteess to England, where the men lost their signature Blue Putteess for standard issue khaki ones. And on the sands of Suvla, they entered into hell, and on those sandy beaches, the first of them fell. Enlist you Newfoundlanders and come follow me. At this time, the Entente forces had been fighting in a brutal slog on the Gallipoli Peninsula for a few months, and so, when the Newfoundlanders finished their training in England and acclimation in Egypt, they were sent to be part of the August Offensive. The brutality of this front was not unheard of to these fresh troops, so they approached their landing site with anxious anticipation. The goal of the Newfoundlanders, alongside thousands of other British troops, was to open a new front by landing at Suvla Bay, and to connect with the Anzac forces further south, at Anzac Cove. The goal of the plan was that this would ultimately help the British push the Ottomans back on this front by catching them off guard, and hopefully finally securing a decisive victory in Gallipoli for the British. The Newfoundlanders landed on the shore of the bay with much chaos and confusion. Many did not understand their role, or were not given a task to take on once landed. So, the men dug in on the first night. In the next few days, the troops were able to push back the light defenses at Suvla Bay, but Frederick Stopford, the commander of the landing at Suvla Bay, did not take the advantage of the fleeing Ottomans by capturing the high ground, because he believed he had to consolidate his position. Some say he acted in such a passive manner because he was used to the slow, meager gains of the Western Front. Soon, Ottoman reinforcements arrived, and from their position high on the hills around the landing spot, no matter where the Entente troops were on the beach, they were threatened by Ottoman guns. This turned into another slog of a front, just like all the others in Gallipoli. But the Newfoundlanders were able to find a small victory for themselves, as they attacked Caribou Hill. This position had been plaguing the Entente forces, as it was the perfect place for Ottoman snipers. So, the Newfoundlanders set out to silence those guns, and did so successfully. A few months later, the Newfoundlanders would be evacuated from their position on Suvla Bay, and help the evacuation of troops in Cape Helles as part of the rear guard. So it's over the mountains and over the sea. Come brave Newfoundlanders and join the Blue Putteess. You'll fight the Hun in Flanders and at Gallipoli. Enlist you Newfoundlanders and come follow me. We just talked about the Newfoundlanders participating in Gallipoli, but they also participated in battles in Flanders and northern France, such as Monchy-le-Preux, Beaumont-Hamel, Massinière, Gueudecourt, and Courtrai. These 5 sites all have a statue of a bronze caribou to commemorate the Newfoundlander lives lost in these battles. The call came from London for the last July drive. To the trenches with the regiment, prepare yourselves to die. The roll call next morning, just a handful survived. Enlist you Newfoundlanders and come follow me. Of the aforementioned 5 battles the Newfoundlanders were part of, Beaumont-Hamel was definitely the most casualty-heavy engagement. This engagement was part of the larger Battle of the Somme, which had been in the works for months now. The Entente hoped for any sort of victory after suffering so many losses, from Gallipoli to the loss of Belgium, and just the entire Eastern Front. The Battle of the Somme would hopefully be an end to the war by striking a decisive blow against the Germans that the Entente could hopefully take advantage of by keeping the Germans in retreat. Since their time in Gallipoli, the Newfoundlanders had been in Egypt, but now that the French were pinned in Verdun and could no longer send troops to be a part of the attack, the British had to take the lead in the Somme offensive. This meant that the Newfoundlanders were moved to Beaumont-Hamel to be part of the attack. A few days before the battle, Lieutenant Owen Steele, a Newfoundlander, part of the Newfoundland Regiment, wrote in his journal, "It is surprising to see how happy and lighthearted everyone is, and yet, this is undoubtedly the last day for a good many. The various battalions marched off whistling and singing, and it was a great sight. Of course, this is the best way to take things, and hope for the best." During the period of preparation for the Battle of the Somme, the Germans had been heavily fortifying their trenches, and many had been brought north from Verdun to the Somme. The Somme offensive was started with a massive mine explosion under the trenches of the Germans, signaling to the Germans that an attack was incoming. It also didn't help that before the battle, the artillery barrage by the British failed to effectively damage German defenses, nor destroy much of the German barbed wire, which made the ensuing advance by British forces move at a snail's pace. Another drawback from the intact barbed wire was that the troops were funneled into kill zones, which were breaks in the barbed wire, if the soldiers even made it that far. In no man's land, between the trench lines, stood a tree that the troops called Danger Tree, which had miraculously survived the constant bombardment in the area, the only one of its kind to be seen by the Newfoundlanders. This was also a point where there was a break in the German barbed wire, and so Danger Tree served as a muster point on the battlefield for the troops. So, once the order came for the Newfoundlanders to attack, the men made their way towards their destination, the Danger Tree. The trenches were so filled with wounded and dead men that it was almost impossible to advance through them. So, the regiment settled on simply walking above the trenches, in full view of the Germans. There was also a significant damage to communication lines. So, while this was happening, no other divisions were advancing. And to make matters worse, by this time in the day, the advancing Newfoundland regiment was perfectly silhouetted by the sun as they advanced, making them easy targets for the Germans. Combining all of these factors, the results were devastating, leading to only around 100 of the 780 men of the regiment surviving the engagement, and for roll call the next day, only 68 were fit enough to attend. The regiment suffered the second greatest percentage of casualties that day, and the first day of the Somme offensive had been the deadliest day of the war yet. The stone men on Water Street still cry for the day that the pride of the city went marching away. To commemorate all of the Newfoundlander lives lost in the First World War, a statue was built on Water Street in the capital of Newfoundland, St. John's. This monument was unveiled in 1924, with the woman in the center of the monument representing the commitment and loyalty of the Newfoundlanders to the crown, while the 4 men are meant to represent the different ways the Newfoundlanders aided in the war effort: the Army, the Royal Navy, the Merchant Navy, and the Forestry Corps. There is a plaque at the bottom of the monument that reads, "A grateful people to honor its war dead." As more wars were fought by the Newfoundlanders, more of these plaques were added to commemorate the different dead from each conflict. 1,000 men slaughtered to hear the king say, Enlist you Newfoundlanders, and come follow me. Over 1/3 of the eligible men in Newfoundland enlisted in the war effort. Some fought with the Blue Putteess, and others as part of Canadian or British regiments. Somewhere between 1,200 and 1,300 of the around 12,000 army personnel of Newfoundland lost their lives fighting for the British Crown, while another 2,000 would be injured. And that was the Blue Putteess highlighted. Please like and subscribe if you liked the video, and if you have any suggestions or comments, leave them in the comment section below, or email me with my email in the description. I also started a Patreon if anyone is interested in supporting a small creator like myself.
So it's over.